You're listening to the We Are Libertarians podcast network. Find all of our shows at wearelibertarians.com.
Hey loves, Haley Steinfeld here. Let's be real. When I'm on the red carpet, everyone wants to know whose dress I'm wearing. But here's the thing. We're so focused on those details, we're missing something that's actually way more important. Breast health. It's wild. Breasts get so much attention, but they're still so ignored when it matters most. Don't know what I'm talking about? Tune in on February 9th and visit yourattentionplease.com. That's yourattentionplease.com. See you then.
You found your person. Now let the Knot help you with everything else. The Knot connects you to the wedding inspo, vendors, venues, and planning tools you need to make your day totally you. Having helped plan 25 million weddings, we've got your back when it comes to every little detail like RSVPs, budgets, and more. Because your wedding comes to life with the connections that matter the most. Get started at theknot.com/audio. The Knot. Let's plan your wedding together.
All right, we're over 100 years away from the Civil War, and the hottest topic in the world right now is talking about Civil War statues. This is We're Libertarians Daily. I am joined by Sarah Brady Wagner, and she is a fantastic host. Not to discredit myself, I am Hodey Johns, your other host, but Sarah might have an edge on me a little bit through experience. Sarah, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, and I think you sell yourself short a little there. Hodey, you are definitely our most reliable.
As far as consistent to get a hold of, that happens when you have no social life. So, or you dedicate that whole social life to the libertarian cause, I think is what I'm supposed to say. This is something that you've actually spent a great deal of time on. So
I have.
The format might be a little different. I might just ask you a few questions and have you reveal your many, many talks to a new audience.
Yeah, so when it comes to Confederate statues, to me, the perfect example for this, and the reason that I've ended up talking about this so much, is actually a very local situation for me. I live in North Carolina, and we have, actually in the city that I used to work in, Chapel Hill, is where there's a particular statue that has been involved in just a saga that has unfolded over literally years now. Having to do with what to do with this one Confederate monument statue. It does a really good job of just kind of showing the different sides of the argument. And to me, it's something that if you walk away thinking it's a simple answer, then you maybe have missed some of the details.
It's many complexities and many different things to consider, as with so many other issues in our debates and the reason we have them. Now, let me ask you, was this statue, especially in your community, I find that the majority of them were actually erected after the Civil War, most during the FDR administration. Is that true of the statue in your community as well, or is it all the way from the Confederate era?
So the statue in Chapel Hill that I'm talking about, which is referred to as Silent Sam, it was put up after the Civil War. I believe it was one of the earlier statues that was put up. But what differs it from a lot of the statues that you may have seen in the news is most of the statues that are put up are of generals, are of specific figures who were involved in the war. But then there are also statues that the debate is slightly different over. Silent Sam is one of them, where they are statues that are considered objects of remembrance for soldiers who died. So when you're dealing with the discussion over what the monument symbolizes and means, that's your first point where you end up hitting into, complication and conflict, because it really depends on who you ask. But when you're talking about statues that glorify literally generals of, the Confederate Army, that's a bit of a different conversation than Silent Sam, who is a statue of an enlisted Confederate soldier, specifically one of the students that went to the UNC. And when it comes to, the University of North Carolina, because it was in North Carolina, all of the students who were conscripted, which is another important factor of this, is that they were dealing with soldiers who were forced into battle. They're not volunteers.
So I know a little bit
for the Confederate Army.
Yeah, I know a little bit about Silent Sam just because it was big in the news. Now that you're right, that one was earlier. That one was 1913. That was Woodrow Wilson presiding, another libertarian favorite. But and everything he said was true. Now you say is. I was under the impression that it had been pulled down. Is that
yes?
Not? It has. Okay. Spoiler alert, it's been pulled down. Okay.
It has been pulled down, but that does not mean that the debate is over. And so let me kind of backtrack here to walk you through a little bit of a timeline of what had happened. So we have all of these debates that start happening. People want to, change the names of certain buildings on campus to no longer glorify, Confederate generals or people who were involved in slavery, things like that. And then it turns to a discussion of the statue of Silent Sam, which during 2015 starts to regularly be vandalized in a variety of ways. There's just graffiti with saying, murderers, KKK, spray painting Black Lives Matter, and so that goes to even blindfolding the statue with a Confederate flag. Just lots of symbolic protests that kind of continue to spurn more conversation within the community about the meaning and the future of these statues. This just continues throughout all of 2016 and gets to the point where the problem that they're facing here is that in 2015, when this started, the General Assembly was in North Carolina was one of several states that decided to pass a law under the guise of historical preservation that said you cannot move any statues on public property, any historical markers or monuments on public property without the prior approval of the Historic Commission, which since its creation to current date has not actually approved anything being moved. Which brings us to kind of the next set in this law. Or in this whole story, in this saga. One thing that you hear come up a lot in these debates, because this is not the only monument that's been torn down. You had monuments that have been torn down in other areas by, mob violence, essentially. You hear a lot, they should have done it the right way. Well, when it comes to Silent Sam, there was a genuine concerted effort to do it the right way. There were multiple plans that were actually submitted to the Historical Commission for different ways to move Silent Sam to kind of clarify the messaging around him. So some people said, I look at Silent Sam and I see it's just a symbol of white supremacy and oppression and, glorifying the Confederacy and what it fought for. Other people look at it and they say, it's just signifying history and we should take it within the context of that history. But there's also an argument that when it was initially put up by the Daughters of the Confederacy, it was intended to scorn and to mark the unacceptability of conscripting scholars and making soldiers of them and sending them off to die in battle. That has been mentioned by multiple people that was the original idea and intent behind the statue. But when it was actually dedicated, Julian Carr gave a speech dedicating the statue and made multiple just blatant racist comments. He even glorified a memory of whipping a black woman nearby where the statue was being dedicated. And that has really, caused that issue of what is the meaning of the statue? Should you go to original intent? Should you go to modern interpretation? Or should you go to the way that it was actually dedicated? Who is to say what a statue means at any time?
There's that statue, the bull and the little girl near Wall Street, where people talk about, that's been so misconstrued now that it's hard to even go back to the place where it originally meant, the artist's intent, because society's view of it is just so much different in the way we look at it. And here's the breakdown for me on and the reason it's so complicated an issue, especially for me. I love history. I love culture. I hate censorship. I think we have to learn from these things. I don't love when people, it feels like one of those, when cities would beat other countries, even if those countries were doing something bad, when they go and destroy all their artwork, part of me dies a little on the inside, because I say, even if it's wrong, there's something to learn from there. And then, on the other hand, I really hate public parks. I really hate racism. I hate Jim Crow. I hate that era. I hate what it stood for. I hate the Civil War. I hate the treason. So I'm stuck between these passions of things that I love and these things that I hate. And I think that might be why it inspires so many powerful feelings on both sides. And I kind of relate to both sides and what they're talking about, because it's a strong feeling. And then I'm stuck between trying to mix two really powerful elements, if you will. And surprise, surprise, they kind of explode when you put them together. I mean, people are dying because of these protests and counter-protests.
So it's really interesting, because that's exactly kind of what the story of Silent Sam shows us, that there are people in the community, both, who are there because they work and, are students of or faculty of the university, but there's also people there who are just North Carolina natives and who see this differently. And when it came to trying to come up with proposals to give to the Historical Commission of what should happen to Silent Sam, the community really came together, and they've come up and continue to come up with some really novel solutions and presenting them to the Historical Commission, and every single time they're knocked down. Specifically, it's interesting, you also mentioned the statue of the little girl and the bull.
Yes.
That has all to do with placement. Placement has so much to do with how we interpret something. And in the case of Silent Sam, one of the recommendations that was made and struck down was to move him to a different place on campus, specifically to have him standing across from the armory on campus, which to me, if the original intent is to make a statement about the soldierizing of scholars, that makes a much more clear statement to have this statue of a conscripted soldier standing across from the armory. That was knocked. That was just struck down as an option, though, as every option of where you can move him has been to, which allowed some groups in Chapel Hill to actually challenge the law that was passed in 2015 on the grounds that it was being inconsistently enforced, or it was not being enforced to the letter of the law. The basic argument behind it was saying that the law says that it can be moved as long as there is agreement and it is being moved to a place of equal honor. And when everything that was required in the law was fulfilled, the Historical Commission still rejected them, and therefore it could be said that the Historical Commission was not upholding the law itself. The Historical Commission was using the law as a guise to, enforce the status quo. It's a situation where the community really did come together and grapple with this difficult issue and come to a solution that would at least appease all sides. And the government stepped in and said, no, you're not allowed to do that.
Yeah, it was a surprise. Yeah. And in existing law, I mean, and I can see if you're not supposed to move them, you're not supposed to move them. But I think the intent here is, and in looking at it, popular opinion, even among southern states outside of the Confederate states, is that they remain in place. Now, it's hardly a consensus. It's a slight majority, but it's a majority nonetheless. But I think it's because people do value art and sculptures to some degree. I think when we see the destruction of art in any way, or statues, it kind of gives you kind of the sick feeling in your stomach a little bit, regardless of what it's about. I mean, I've seen some Nazi art that managed to survive, and of course I hate almost all of it, but I'm not going to tear it up. Like, I would make myself sick to tear it up, because I think it's important that people see it. This is something that happened. Now, what you said, the intent was actually pretty positive, especially among libertarians. Conscription is awful, right? Drafts are terrible, and it's one of those things. Boy, I wish we had learned the real message of Silent Sam going into World War II, going into the Vietnam War, Korea, all those things that we've had to use drafts for, all those conflicts. I wish that we learned our lesson from that statue, but I mean, unfortunately, that statue has come to mean something else. It's it's fascinating how art gets turned around that way, and I think art is interpreted a lot of the time to mean something other than what it actually means. This goes back to the Fearless Girl statue again. That charging bull was supposed to be awesome, and now the Fearless Girl is awesome, and the charging bull is kind of the villain, because the Fearless Girl got installed after the charging bull. And so the bull was originally supposed to be like, yeah, this is the toughness and coolness of Wall Street. And then there's this little girl standing, defiant of it. And I like both messages, but the one comes at the expense of the other. Mm-hmm. And everybody's got a right to, I like the right to art. I think we get these dicey libertarian issues when it becomes public, because then I'm funding the maintenance of it regardless of how I feel of it or not.
Right.
And I tend to think, and I guess correct me or extrapolate if I'm wrong, or I guess I can't be wrong in my opinion, but at least how I simply feel about it at the moment, if there's maybe information I'm not considering, is that I would so love to see all of this privatized. I would love to see all of these, somebody have like, hey, this is a Confederate museum park, and it's my land, and I'm going to do what I want with it, because that really takes the onus off of the taxpayer to say, hey, I'm not paying for it. I can pay if I want to go see it. I'm not going to give my patronage because I don't like it or don't like what it stands for. But then we can still have it around. Mm-hmm. What would you say to that?
Well, I'd say the debate really just centers around the statues that are there right now and what do you do with them. So if you're selling them off, you're going to have people who are going to make the argument that you're destroying history by doing that. You could just sell them off to people who may not honor them. You're taking them down from a position of honor to just be done with whatever a private buyer wants to do. That can seem, like destroying history to a lot of people. Unfortunately, we won't get to see the outcome of the lawsuit I mentioned before, because in order for the lawsuit to have gone forward and for the law to be challenged, on the basis of you're not actually following the law, then to maintain standing in court, the statue also had to had to literally maintain standing.
Right.
And in August of 2017, an event happened that I'm sure we all remember, which is the Charlottesville rally.
Yeah.
Or Charlottesville protests or riots or whatever you want to call it, that resulted in the death of Heather Heyer. The just impact of that in the Chapel Hill community was very motivating and very angering for a lot of particularly freshman students who maybe were new to the community. I mean, this is literally just as you're having students who are coming in for the first time, who are just new students. It's the beginning of the school year. There's not sufficient time for the people who are on campus who are working to try and legally be able to get rid of this and, have the opportunity for private solutions to be made without government interference. The message did not get to them fast enough, and there ended up being a series of protests by the end of August that tore down the Silent Sam statue and literally just threw a rope around and pulled it down to the ground, and the statue itself crumbled. And the following several months has really just been what seems like a never-ending cycle, because Silent Sam has still not gone back up. But legally, he has to, because the law that I mentioned earlier not only requires that they cannot be moved, but it requires that if anything happens to them, or if they are moved, or if they're damaged, then they have to be repaired and placed back in the exact same spot within 90 days. We are quite a bit away from 90 days out from August 2017 at this point, because no solution could be found. And one of the reasons behind that was that the statue itself was not salvageable. So the conversation shifted from, you can't just pick up the statue and put it back up. You have to spend money to try and commission a replica, or you have to decide to do something different with them. And in this case, the pedestal is still in place, still being regularly vandalized. And there are multiple commissions that are formed to come up with solutions for what to do. And once again, every solution that has been recommended has been struck down, and the commission's stance still just maintains, no, you have to put it back up. the last recommendation that was actually made by the Durham City Council was I thought was a really novel solution to kind of thread the needle on the problem. It was to take the original statue in its as-is form, crumpled, having been pulled down, and to put it back up with a marker explaining its history inside of one of the buildings, in essentially, kind of a museum space. But so that it would still be on campus, it would still be considered in a place of honor, and it would be in exactly the condition that it was pulled down in.
I find it fascinating, and I know these are two different levels of government. We're looking at federal and state here, but that they are so careful with this issue that they've got several committees, invested millions of dollars, had all these, official, government-sanctioned organized protests and sit-ins and discussions, and yet somehow it's like crazy easy to give an automatic weapon to somebody in ISIS. Like, I don't. On one, it seems like I understand that they're navigating laws and they're trying to be really thoughtful. And then on the other hand, some level of government will just be like, oh, yeah, arming gang lords in Mexico, that's fine.
No big deal.
That's no biggie. Like, they're just, it seems like in one situation, which requires a lot of tact, they're being tactless. And then in this situation, where honestly doing one or the other would have been better. Like, either completely protecting it and getting some security there, or selling it to a private buyer. I mean, you might say they wouldn't have taken care of it, but they would have done better than that, Or
I have a friend who likes to say no is not a policy solution, and I feel like that's what's happened in this situation. Is that when the people in a community are faced with a problem and they're trying to solve it, it's really always frustrated by having to go to government and ask permission to solve your own problems, especially when the government's solution is just to say no, because that's not a solution. There's no additional help. Whereas then when you have, like you're saying, there's parts in the federal government that are, so steeped within the deep state that there's no one who is willing to say yes, or who there's no one who, is willing to say no to people and is always just willing to say yes.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I think the community has to decide on, especially I think if you're paying for the area that's in, the public needs to have another say on it. Now, if they say it stays up, then, I don't like any of the public has to pay for anything, but I feel like if somebody gets a say on it, that's better than nobody. Now, one final question for you. Let's say let's move off of, let's extrapolate Silent Sam, getting away from that and going into maybe my hometown, which has a Confederate statue, or maybe some other piece of art that I don't like in a public place. Having navigated this yourself, what's your recommendation on preserving it and getting it out of public at the same time? What do we do as libertarians that want to not pay for it but still want the thing to exist? Where do we start?
Well, I think we have to, like you said before, we have to consider community standards. We have to consider community solutions to their own problems, and that, the one community can decide to get rid of their Confederate statues while another community may still value and treasure theirs. And it all comes back to, that interpretation difficulty. But anytime that you want to make a difference in your town, it always starts with you have to, actually step and speak about that interpretation. Now, my recommendation to anybody, if you're, wanting to try and change something or get rid of a publicly funded piece of, art that you find objectionable, is first to make sure that there's not a law that won't allow you to do that. Sometimes there are laws even around art that's allowed to be displayed in public areas, that there can be, some municipalities, some states, are very against censorship, and some of them have it codified very well. That's one of the interesting things about just living in different communities, is there are very different laws and very different expectations for people.
Wow.
It's one of those things that really varies state to state, and I'm fascinated also by how it plays out in some of the northern states who don't have these kinds of laws where, the state is preventing the cities and the municipalities from taking action. Because we have some very segregated, blue cities, and that's really where most of these debates have happened. We have a lot of Confederate monuments that there's no conversation around because they're in more rural areas where the people don't have as big of an issue with them.
Well, like you said, I guess we'll wrap up here, but knowledge is power. This is how we make change, is to inform the community and let that stir their feelings. Mm-hmm. I think if people in North Carolina had viewed this as a monument against conscription,
then we might be having a different debate.
Yeah, completely. People would be, I imagine that most people are completely against conscription. And I think that it'd be standing, and I think especially college-age kids would be against it. But, lack of knowledge has meant that statue is about Jim Crow.
And lack of knowledge happens when we don't have conversations. It's easy to call somebody a libtard. It's not necessarily always as easy, excuse me, or as quick to sit down and say, okay, let me honestly listen to where you're coming from and consider that you have a different perspective.
Yeah, I totally agree. So yeah, and the best place to do that is keep listening to our podcast, keep listening for Sarah and myself, and we'll keep researching and keep bringing you what we find. Again, this is not a one-way conversation. We'd love to hear from you. The Facebook group, the Discord. You can find us in our new book club on Goodreads. Many, many ways to get a hold of us and share your thoughts on the issue. We value all your input. Most of your inputs.
Yeah, please, if you're in our Facebook group, let us know what, has happened. If there's a different story around a Confederate monument in your town, or, maybe not a Confederate monument after all, maybe something that's religious.
Bingo. Well, Sarah, great talking with you again. And I look forward to talking to you later in the week.
All right. Till next time.